What do actors, musicians, comedians, talk show hosts, politicians, journalists, retired athletes, and the classic influencer all have in common? They're desperate for your attention, but also in 2026, they have a podcast.
Barack Obama, can you join us? Now don't start.
This is Amy Poehler. This is the first episode of my podcast.
Conan O'Brien.
Louis Theroux.
Gary Lineker.
White boy of the motherfucking year.
Podcasts have been around and been big for decades now, but it feels like this January, podcasts are bigger than ever. Amy Poehler just won a Golden Globe for the first ever Best
This
Podcast
is exactly
Award.
how I pictured it. Snoop giving me the award.
And that same week, the Bill Simmons podcast streamed its first episode on Netflix. Netflix is joining the podcast game in a big way, making deals costing tens of millions of dollars with Barstool Sports, iHeartRadio, and a number of individual podcasts. And in my day job as an architect, I'm noticing that every developer in New York is demanding the inclusion of a podcast recording studio in their housing projects. Podcasts aren't going anywhere, so in this video I wanted to talk about the larger podcast landscape. Why have we all become so obsessed with video podcasts? Why are Netflix choosing now to throw their hat in the ring? And what does this mean for the future of the way that the public get their information? Is the rise of podcasts a good thing? Let's see. Okay, so the rise of podcasts, I think it's kind of obvious. It's something that you can consume while you do something else, while you cook, while you clean, while you commute. It's something that you can just have on in the background while you go about your daily life. It's something that's very easy to pay half your attention to, yet still feel like you're gaining something or learning something while doing it. The big worry is that it's kind of becoming a substitute for actually going outside and meeting a friend because you get that feeling from watching a podcast. Compared to just mindlessly scrolling on TikTok and Instagram, it definitely feels better. But compared to actually having a conversation with a friend in the real world where you're participating rather than just listening, surely it can't hold a candle. The big selling point is that it can be 100% authentic with no big production company overseeing the autonomy of the creator. People are happy for the actual production quality to be far worse on a podcast on YouTube than on a TV show that they're watching on Netflix, because the rawness of it is kind of the point. The whole design is to make the viewer feel like they're friends with the podcast host, really. Now, I've worked in production as production assistant the last year quite a bit, and from the talent's perspective, I 100% can see the desire in switching from formal television to podcasts. For the likes of Amy Poehler, Jon Stewart, Conan O'Brien, I can only imagine the thought of the independence that podcasts bring. No hair and makeup, no call times, no guests you don't want to talk to, no waiting around, no retakes, no script, no filter, just a camera and a microphone in your own home and an easy way to directly communicate with a huge audience. Not to mention the production team of a handful of people, which means a much larger slice of the pie when it comes to monetization. And boy, do these podcast hosts know how to monetize.
Folks, we got a new one here. We got a new little sponsor here, the joinbuilt.com.
The official sports betting partner of the NBA.
And I know this is an advertisement and we've got to say it's great and that, but I do have Huel a lot, actually.
Yeah,
I do.
At what point in your life?
And this brings me to the kind of main subject of this video, and that's Gary Lineker and the Rest is Football podcast.
Hello and welcome to The Rest is Football with Alan Shearer, Micah Richards and me, Gary Lineker.
And this is a podcast that I've watched pretty regularly over the last couple of years. Just three ex-professionals in their own respective homes chatting over Zoom about football. The Rest is Football has made a deal with Netflix to come off of YouTube for the World Cup next summer and broadcast directly on Netflix.
For this summer's World Cup, The Rest is Football is going to be on Netflix.
It's about damn time. We deserve it. We've been grafting now for how many years? And now finally we've got a chance to explore on Netflix. I've been waiting for you, Netflix.
The World Cup only lasts 1 month, but in this deal, The Rest is Football is getting paid £14 million. That's so crazy to me. The Rest is Football is produced by Goalhanger, a production company founded by Gary Lineker, and they run a podcast empire. With The Rest is History, The Rest is Politics, The Rest is Entertainment, and I think a bunch of other ones too. And I think the story of that company is a pretty good direct representation of this huge rise of podcasts. So the company was founded in 2014, and initially all it was doing was making sporting documentaries, but very quickly switched to the podcast game. Over the last number of years, each of these respective podcasts have been building a very, very loyal fan base. And I think a huge part to play in that is the switch to video. Here is the host of The Rest is Entertainment talking about that switch that was made just 2 years ago.
Do you remember when the first day we ever recorded this podcast, and Tony Pasta, one of Girlhanger's co-founders who was in the studio with us, said, yeah, just to let you know, we're going to do something, we're going to actually film this because we sort of think that people are starting to watch podcasts. And I'm thinking, oh my God, well, I'd have worn something different, etc. The phenomenon of people watching podcasts is so extreme now that I don't think we should really even call this a podcast any longer, and you have to sort of call it a show for want of a better term.
The switch to video for podcasts was actually genius. I can't tell you the number of times that I'm listening to a podcast, someone says something funny and I rewind just the last 10 seconds and watch it instead of just listen to see their facial expressions as they tell this joke. I don't want to sit down and spend an hour just watching people talk. That's boring. But while I go about my business listening to it and just rewind specific snippets, that's the magic. When you combine that with the fact that we're all realizing what we're consuming on TikTok and Instagram Reels is total slop, especially with the rise of AI-generated content, I think Netflix's move towards podcasts really begins to make a bit more sense. It all comes back to rawness, human connection, and authenticity. And monetizing that human connection is very, very lucrative. Here are some quotes for you. In October 2022, Gary Lineker said, "We don't really know what the boundaries are in terms of growth, but it's a very, very good business." Gary Lineker, from his time presenting Match of the Day, knows the value of the on-screen talent.
Alan, Micah, thank you. I suspect our paths will cross again very shortly.
As such, presenters of these podcasts are not paid a wage. They're paid 2/3 of the total revenue generated by their podcast. Rory Stewart, the host of The Rest is Politics, has called it championship footballer money, which news outlets have interpreted as translating to many thousands of pounds per week. That was in 2022. I think they might be in the Premier League now. In April 2025, the co-CEO of Netflix, Ted Sarandos, said, "The lines are getting blurry between podcasts and talk shows," adding, "As the popularity of video podcasts grows, I suspect you'll see some of them find their way to Netflix."
I must say to all those armchair media analysts who always thought they understood talent pay and that the BBC had spent years overpaying Gary Lineker, I wonder, do they think he's getting paid less by Netflix than he was paid in a year by the BBC? The answer might shock you if you're an idiot. But Netflix are really doing this.
So with that business model, let's break down the maths. £14 million is around $18 million US. 2/3 of that, 12 million. 3 different hosts. That means each host should be taking home $4 million US for 1 month's work. Not bad going. Now, I'm sure there's other hidden fees and costs and taxes, but if it's in that ballpark, that's a lot. So that brings me to item 2 on the agenda. Why do Netflix think that now is the time to get involved? While we might stick on a movie or TV show on Netflix at the end of the day after a day's work, we're not really watching series all day long, or at least most of us aren't. We are, however, watching podcasts. And Netflix is thinking, how do I tap into that? They've already gone all in on sports with Jake Paul's boxing fights or Christmas Day NFL games, but now they're expanding their experiment into podcasts. Now, by all means, this is an unproven experiment. Netflix costs money, YouTube is free. People click onto YouTube multiple times during the day. They don't really just click onto Netflix without having something specific that they want to watch. But in the case of Netflix and the amount of money that they have, spending a couple $100 million just to see, it's worth it. And a couple of individual podcasters are making a lot of money in the process. The real big question in all of this is whether this is a good thing. And who knows? In some ways, for broader culture, I think the success of podcasts is quite positive. With AI-generated content taking over, what everyone is scared of is that artists will lose their jobs because all that people will consume will be AI. But what podcasts are slowly proving is that people don't consume art for the most beautiful, most perfect thing. People consume art to feel human connection. This is a bit of a crazy metaphor, but it's a bit like when the realism movement transitioned into the impressionist movement, when artists got too perfect at painting portraits and people's faces that they turned into something a bit wackier, a bit more abstract, that showed more emotion, more human connection. It was more about showing thoughts and ideas rather than the perfect recreation of a person's face. Obviously, I'm not calling Joe Rogan modern day Vincent van Gogh, but sometimes when things become a bit too perfect, humans yearn for something that is more vulnerable and shares more emotions rather than aesthetic perfection. But the prominence of podcasts does give me hope that people do crave human connection in the media that they consume. What I don't particularly like, what I'm a bit wary of, is the centralizing of all profit that comes from film and TV and media to these streaming platforms. Sure, going with Netflix and Apple TV and Amazon Prime gives a much larger slice of the pie to the creator. It also gives a lot more power to those huge tech companies. And I'm not sure if they need any more power. In the world of media, one thing is certain. Things are definitely changing. Whether that's a good thing or not, that remains to be seen. That's the end of this video. Very quick and easy one today. I haven't made a video in a couple of months, so just kind of wanted to get the ball rolling. Hopefully I'll make a lot more videos this year out and about and interviewing people and telling real stories rather than just me sat in my room. But yeah, comment down below if you think I should start a podcast. That's a joke, by the way. Thanks for watching.